Our guest today is Andy Schectman. And could you explain why the BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, so crucial to the future of the world?
Where the German Bundesbank made a very big deal about repatriating their gold in 2017. Now, this was at the tail end of what had amounted to a 6-year bear market in precious metals. And you know, in 2017 in particular, it was a rough year to own a precious metals company. You had Bitcoin really taking off. You had the equity markets doing fantastic, and gold was languishing. And central banks were selling it. It didn't make any sense to me. Why would the central banks be selling gold? I guess, well, maybe because it's been in the midst of a downdraft, and there's this new thing called Bitcoin that's really starting to take off. And maybe we were just moving away from the old way of doing things, and we're moving into a new reality. And well, the capitulation came to mind. And in 2017, 6 out of every 10 orders that we did were people selling. Most of them aggravated that Bitcoin, which was supposedly cut from the same cloth as gold, was accentuating itself. And why wasn't gold? So out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank, who had attempted to start repatriating their gold a year or two earlier from the Federal Reserve in New York, finally made a big deal about it publicly. And they said, hey, send us back all of our gold. Now, it's important to understand that really, since the end of World War II, the United States held most of the world's gold. And the reason, in a nutshell, that we did was that at the end of World War II, at Bretton Woods, when the dollar was anointed the world reserve currency, we made a promise to the world saying, hey, you can give us your gold because it's safe over here. You've gone through 2 world wars and it's safe over here. And I'll tell you what, we'll pay you $35 an ounce for your gold. And in turn, you take the proceeds of that and you buy our US treasuries. And this will give you a return on a non-interest bearing asset, and it will be held safely. And we will always sell it back to you for $35 an ounce. Now, banks are increasing their gold holdings quietly and repatriating them even when gold isn't doing much. In 2018, the following year, you guys, those same groups that repatriated their gold bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years combined previously. So now something's really going on. These banks are repatriating their gold from the Fed and the Bank of England, and now they're buying copious amounts of it. Really interesting. In 2019, those numbers were up nearly 100% in terms of central bank purchases. Mile marker number 1, 2019, after the banks have just massively accumulated for the past 2.5 years and repatriated all of their gold, you have to wonder, were they clued into what I'm about to tell you? The Bank of International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank in Basel, Switzerland, in April of 2019, quietly reclassified gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. Now, since 1944, at the end of the war, there had only been one Tier 1 asset recognized by the central banks, and that was US dollars and treasuries. Gold from Tier 3, where only 50% was valued on the balance sheet, to Tier 1, where it's as good as cash. This really is the contracts and the settlement on the new Belt Road is predominantly being settled in the new Chinese digital yuan. This is a very, very, very big deal because for the last 3 years, the digital yuan has successfully transacted upwards ends of $20 billion in trades and in settlements, even using it at the Winter Olympics. And I would like to call this a beta test. We'll get back to that as we progress, but really big deal where 75% of human population is beginning to be indoctrinated into a new currency, into a new settlement system. This ambitious infrastructure project is void of American participation. There are the International Monetary Fund. Well, this is a group of nearly 200 countries that was established at Bretton Woods, says to the world, hey, we want a new Bretton Woods. Well, what does that mean? That means that 200 countries from around the world want a new standard that isn't what the original Bretton Woods standard is, which is the US dollar as the world reserve currency. It said right on their website, we're requesting a new Bretton Woods moment, whatever the heck that means. But that really started to make me think, geez, this is bigger than even I had thought. When you have 200 countries from around the world on top of the Belt Road Initiative, on top of gold being reclassified Tier 1, on top of all the central banks repatriating their gold, now the IMF wants a new standard. So now I'm convinced something's going on. Towards the end of the Vietnam War, President de Gaulle from France realized that we were issuing more dollars and treasuries to fund war than we had gold backing these promises. So he sent warships filled with dollars to New York Harbor and said to, President Nixon, we want our gold back for these dollars. And we gave it to him. And he bled down a very large portion of the gold held at the U.S. Treasury. And at that moment, Nixon said, okay, August of 1971, that's it. The window's closed temporarily, although it's never opened back up. So it's been a long temporary. But we went back on our promise to the world. But what has made the dollar the world reserve currency was that 3 years later, Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia. And he made a promise to the Saudis. He said, how about this? We will back you. Well, let's call it a joint military cooperation agreement. And we will stand behind you. We'll provide you munitions and support. No one will ever mess with the Saudi kingdom. But for that, OPEC is going to value dollar or oil in dollars globally. Okay, they said, fine. And so since 1974, every single country on the planet has had to own, virtually every country has had to own dollars in order to buy oil. And it has created this synthetic demand for the dollar called the petrodollar and made the dollar the world reserve currency. If you want to power your country, you must own dollars. It is the protection of the Saudi kingdom, and by default, the relationship with OPEC that has enabled the dollar to be the world reserve since 1974, because 3 years prior, the link to gold was severed. The dollar was at that point fiat, backed by nothing. And obviously, we all know the history. Since that point, the dollar's lost over 90% of its value. But that's for a discussion for a different day.
Right. Exactly as I said. Kissinger promises the Saudis will protect you as long as everybody in the world must buy oil in dollars. So it became the petrodollar, no longer a gold-backed dollar. Am I correct on that?
100%. Exactly. And that's perfect. That's exactly right. And then comes mile marker number 3. And no one knows this. And the fact that our media doesn't say anything about it, I find it to be deplorable, because this next moment, I think, sets the stage for everything that's going to happen in this country moving forward. And that is what happened the day that we left Afghanistan. Now, but I will tell you that as an American patriot, I was embarrassed to almost call myself an American the day we left Afghanistan, leaving behind enemy lines, something that was something we never would have done in the country I grew up in. You would never leave servicemen and women behind enemy lines. You would never leave the people who trusted you with their lives, the freedom fighters, behind enemy lines and give their biometrics to the Taliban. Because we embarrassed ourselves on a massive scale with people hanging from a transport plane as the last plane out of Afghanistan is going, knowing we have Americans that are still there today. It's inexcusable and it's deplorable. And I think it in many ways changed the way the world looks at the United States, or at least our leadership. What happened the day after we left Afghanistan? Russia and Saudi Arabia announced a joint military cooperation agreement. What? Are you kidding me? What? Russia is now protecting Saudi Arabia? And the day after that, guess who did it again? Nigeria makes the same announcement that Nigeria and Russia are now Russia is protecting Nigeria through a joint military cooperation agreement. We've already seen that Nigeria is selling their oil to China right now for yuan-denominated bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It's called the Petro-Yuan Bond. And because it is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, this is how countries like Iran sidestep our sanctions. They'll sell their oil to the Chinese in a Petro-Yuan bond, and they can immediately convert it to gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange into kilo bars and take possession of it. This is why the Shanghai Gold Exchange has delivered close to 100 times more gold than we have, the COMEX, which sets the price, because these countries are doing just that. And guess who else is doing it? Saudi Arabia. So you have the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, the Saudis, and now Nigeria, 2 of the 13 OPEC member countries, selling their oil already to China, both being protected by Russia. Nigeria, part of the Belt Road Initiative, being protected by China. They're selling their oil in something other than dollars. This is a huge deal, of course. So 2022 rolls along, here we are. And I think you could say the mile marker number 4 is one that most people know about, but it's one that I think has incentivized the speeding up, if you will, of this progression of events. And I'm going to lay out several of them. As the world reserve currency, you guys, it's not our job to say who can and can't use it. And that's the biggest mistake you can possibly make. Because our Fed chairman, Powell, I believe has no intention of being written about in history books as blowing up the American dream. Because in the last 3 years, more money has been created in the last 3 years than in the entire history of the country before. The majority of that money that has been created, or a good portion of it, went into assets where hedge funds can borrow $1 billion at 1%. And you know that's not how markets work. They don't go parabolic like this. And I think a lot of it has to do with the distortions and the misallocations that were created through massive money printing. So I think Fed Chairman Powell has no intention of blowing up the system and getting tough on inflation. You know, our president is already telling us that inflation has nothing to do with historic money creation and everything to do with Putin, right? Well, inflation is always 100% of the time a monetary event, always. And when you throw in unproductivity in the equation, it exacerbates the effects of inflation. And that sounds like the last 3 years. Massive money creation, paying everyone to sit on their couch, play video games, and eat bonbons. So you have more money chasing less stuff because no one's producing anything. They're sitting on their couch. So that's the cause of inflation. It has nothing to do with Putin. It has everything to do with the Federal Reserve that has blown up, and a government that has blown up our money supply and incentivized people to be unproductive. If the Fed doesn't want to be the reason for blowing everything up and creating the greatest depression of all time, how about we create a villain? And if you push the Russians out of SWIFT, if you sanction them, if you freeze their assets here in the States, you have every other country in this group, the BRICS, saying, are we next? Is it coming for us next? You think there's any coincidence that China has sold well over 100 billion in treasuries over the last 7 months? They have their eyes set on Taiwan. I think we push the Russians right into the open arms of the Chinese and their CIPS system, the cross interbank payment system. That is what the SWIFT is. It mirrors the SWIFT. It is their answer to the SWIFT. We push them right into the open arms of this coalesced group. So let's talk about what has happened and think about this. Did they absolutely have no idea that by freezing these assets and sanctioning them, that it wouldn't have severe consequences? I say to people so far in 2022, it'll blow you away. First of all, as I mentioned, Nigeria and Saudi Arabia are selling their oil to China for the yuan-denominated petro-yuan bond, which is immediately convertible into gold. At the Shanghai Gold Exchange. You have the Russian-Iran-India corridor that just came out. This is linking Northwest Russia to the Persian Gulf via the Caspian Sea and Iran. Everyone else has to go all the way around, but the countries who are in the group get to cut through, right? You have Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia announced that they are contemplating joining the BRICS nations. Now, if you say publicly you're contemplating, it's a done deal. These countries are moving away from the Western alliances and they are joining the BRICS. And Saudi Arabia. Did I mention Saudi Arabia? Yes, Saudi Arabia is joining the BRICS nations. You had Turkey come out and say they want to ditch the dollar for payments in Russian energy. And they've purchased 75 tons more gold in the first 7 months of the year than any central bank on the planet. They are the largest accumulators of gold. Turkey, who just said they're going to join the BRICS nations and wants to ditch the dollar for Russian energy, they are leading the way in 2022 on gold purchases. You have now 147 countries on the Belt Road, including all of the 13 OPEC countries. All of them are on the Belt Road Initiative. 6 of the 13 BRICS nations, or 6 of the 13 OPEC countries have already joined BRICS or are in process of joining. The 7th, United Arab Emirates, just joined the BRICS Bank. And now you have Russia and China standing arm in arm on a stage a month ago saying they are announcing a new world reserve currency. At the same time, you have gold leaving the COMEX market at the fastest monthly rate ever. You have silver, on the other hand, being massively drawn down through the London Metals Exchange to the smallest amount ever in recorded, ever since they have started keeping track of the amount of silver on the LME, and massive accumulation of gold and silver off the exchanges taking possession. So let's put all of this together, right? So what does it all mean? You have over 100 million ounces of silver taken out of SLV by the authorized participant. What does it all mean when put together? And let's think about the Great Reset. How do you get a Great Reset? Well, first, you blow up asset prices to all-time highs, and then at the lowest interest rates in human history. And then you incentivize the world to find a back door, because you watch what just happened to the Russians, who 85% of the world is saying, well, you're still okay to trade with, because they don't like the way the West has handled things. So they're all coalescing in this nation, 147 countries on the Belt Road. All of these countries in the BRICS nations, which amount to 90% of human population, all of this together. And think of the fallacy of composition. All of these countries, one by one, can't stand up to the US. You put them all together and they will dominate the US. So how does it all blow up? Why do you own gold and silver? Why? Remember, gold was classified the only tier 1 asset in the world next to US dollars. Remember, the biggest money in the world, the central banks, the commercial banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the family offices, they're all buying it. They're all taking it off the exchanges, removing counterparty risk. You can see the drawdown from all of the major exchanges. How does this all blow up? Simple. Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS nations. Every OPEC producing country, all 13 of them are on the Belt Road. They all sit on a stage with their arms around states Monday morning somewhere in China or in Russia or wherever this meeting is. And Saudi Arabia says, hey, US, thank you. It's been a hell of a ride. We appreciate it. As you know, we are being now protected by China and Russia. In fact, we struck a joint military cooperation agreement the day you idiots pulled out of Afghanistan the way you did. And we realized that maybe you weren't the best partners to tie our wagon to. Biden to beg for oil. He didn't beg for oil. He hasn't even gone to Mexico or the Texas-Mexico border. He came and asked us to not join the BRICS nations. But we've decided after contemplation that, hey, you know what? It's in our best interest, and all of OPEC, who is on the Belt Road, that we're going to open up energy purchases in other currencies, including the yuan, the rupee, the ruble, maybe euro, gold, and dollars. Like that, it's over. Country on the planet who has had to own dollars since 1974 dumps them. And if you ever saw the moving trading places where one Duke brother says to the other Duke brother, sell, Mortimer, sell, because everyone will start dumping dollars. As the dollar collapses, that's pillar number 1. The dollar value collapses. What happens when those dollars collapse and hit the US shores? Hyperinflation. What happens as an adverse reaction of hyperinflation? Interest rates spike. You have to have higher interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. Interest rates spike. Stocks, bonds, real estate at the same time collapse along with the dollar. The 4 pillars of wealth in this country, stocks, bonds, dollars, and real estate, will all collapse as interest rates spike and as the dollar is globally dumped. Great Reset. This is how fragile the system truly is, and this is why you own precious metals. It is not to get rich, it's because we are on the cusp, I believe, of a change. What is the digital yuan? To me, it is a beta test. Just the other day, and I'm almost done here, just the other day, there was an article that came out by a man named Sergei Glazyev, and he is the Russian minister in charge of integration and macroeconomics for the Eurasian Economic Union. And he came out and he laid the fundamental principles by which the new U.S. post-dollar economic system will be based. And he goes on and says, and I quote, that it will not be based upon any particular currency as with the Bretton Woods order, but rather a market basket of local currencies tied more deeply to an array of real commodities such as gold, other precious metals, grain, hydrocarbons, sugar, etc. But how about all of these countries coalescing not only against the maybe hatred's a strong word, but the universal dislike of the Western hegemony, so much so that we're seeing relationships being mended between Iraq and Iran, where they're building a railway, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, they're mending fences between countries who have hated each other for years. But you know, my friend, they're all coalescing against a central theme. But that's not enough. We need to peg something. What are all the countries that own all the commodities? The BRICS. And all of the countries that are joining the BRICS own all the commodities. So what better way to roll out distributed ledger technology, but to show the pegging of all of the commodities pledged to the new BRICS currency, which they just announced is coming out? Why is gold tier 1? You tell me. Did they know that this was going to happen? The inevitability and the mathematics of the dollar's demise? Is it going to be the central peg to a new world reserve currency? What better way to show the immutability and the veracity of this pegging, but on a distributed ledger, Chinese digital yuan, which I believe will be the rails to a new system, the rails to the new BRICS system, to the next BRICS currency. And when that happens, God help us in this country, because nobody is going to on faulty promises and debt when they can own a currency backed upon nothing but commodities with the veracity and the mutability of said backing shown on a distributed ledger for the entire world to see.
Well, Andy, thank you very much. You may learn about money and you can do very well. But if you are ignorant, just hoping that, Biden and Kamala Harris will save you, I think you're in serious trouble.